Welcome to the campaign strategy section of my Dark Elf guide. In this section of the guide, I'll go over the overall pros and cons of the Dark Elf campaign, my personal experience with it, the different factions and their unique aspects, and finally, any unique mechanics the faction has. I'll put timestamps on screen now to each part of the guide, so you can skip to which bit is relevant to you if you wish to do so. Disclaimer. This guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. This guide is also made using a couple of mods that, in my opinion, bring the game to a more balanced and fun experience. If you want to know what these mods are, then there is a link in the description to a video I made going over each one. Now that's out of the way, let's get into the video. In my time with the Dark Elves, I've found them to be one of the most economically powerful factions I've played yet. The ability to increase post-battle loot while also making money from post-battle captives makes them into a powerhouse at making money, especially if you're constantly fighting, which I happen to be. The slave economy, while it takes a while to get going, is disgusting for making unreal amounts of money with hardly any input from the player other than some basic management. They do come at the cost of public order, never really being amazing, so you do need to spend a big chunk of money on buildings to help with this, but it's a big chunk that you'll make back in no time. Public order is something that the Dark Elves seem to struggle with in general. It could just be because I played Morathi, who has one of the worst mechanics in the game, but we'll come back to that later, but every time I took a settlement, I felt like I had to sit in it forever, or it was guaranteed to rebel in a matter of turns. Of course, rebellions are no issue if you have an army nearby, and can actually continue to fuel the slave economy, but when you're trying to rapidly expand into already hostile territory, it can severely impede your progress. You can also make a lot of money from trade, seeing as you have a massive abundance of resources nearby no matter where you spawn, with one exception. So once you get a few settlements and trade partners under your belt, you can make some serious bank without even trying. Getting these trade partnerships with factions of your own race can also be a massive help in getting them on side to confederate, but to be honest, this was probably the easiest set of confederations I've had in a long time. It could be because all Dark Elves seem to be getting their asses kicked, or because I had lots of money and power, but all of them, with the exception of Malekith, confederated with hardly any input from me. Unfortunately, some of these trade resources appear outside your very limited climate preferences, so it can be a bit of a hassle to get hold of them. I don't know if it's just because I play the Vampire Coast and Skaven after each other, but having climate preferences this limited felt, well, limiting. It can also be quite a hassle to do much expansion at all, since if you don't want to fight another Dark Elf or Rat, the only real option for the most part is High Elves, and we all know how easy that can be if you let them build up their power for too long. One final thing worth noting that is amazing for the Dark Elves are the Black Arcs. I'll go into them in more detail later, but they are honestly incredible for a whole host of reasons, with the crowning one being their ability to let you recruit locally no matter how far from home you are. Now I'll go over my campaign with the Dark Elves and give you some insights as to what you can expect. I played as Morathi, as voted for by the Discord. Thanks for that, guys. If you want to join the Discord, there's a link in the description. It's the best place to get in touch with me and get all the latest news and announcements. The start of the campaign was not an enjoyable experience to say the least. I was being attacked from basically all sides while I tried to secure my starting province. The lizards were coming from the south, High Elves from the east, and eventually more High Elves from the north. Needless to say, I got a little heated and it took me quite a few turns and reloads before I was able to secure my first province. This campaign is severely irritating me. Oh, we're just going to attack you from the north. Okay, I'm going to go to... Oh no, we're also attacking you from the south. Okay, I'll raise an army in the south. Oh no, it's too late for that. You can't do that. You're way too late. Okay, so what can I do? Nothing. Oh, well, that's fun. Once I'd done this, I decided to deal with the nearest threat and get rid of it as soon as I could. I managed to push Mazda Mundi back and sack his capital, after which he was more than willing to give me peace with the promise of not attacking again anytime soon. I had no interest in expanding into Lustria, so I made no further attempt to move south until much later. I then turned my attention to the north, where Illifinar was giving me grief. Since he could use the Underways, or whatever his version of it is called, it was near impossible to track him down, and I got caught in a loop of going back to attack him, but having to retreat since he would backdoor my capital, which is a gigantic pain. After what felt like 600 turns, but was actually more like 30, I finally managed to get rid of him with the help of Tretch, which left the High Elves to the east as the final thorn in the very thorny side. I took to crossing the ocean and started raising the settlements, desperate just to get rid of the elves attacking me and get back to securing my own continent. After a few turns of Tyrion swooping in to colonise everything I had just raised, I realised I needed to take care of him now before he got too strong, since he already had the majority of Ulthuan under his control already, and we all know how scary that can be if left uncontested. I started occupying these settlements rather than raising them, and got myself a foothold on the island despite the best efforts of Morathi's awful corruption mechanic. I desperately tried to spread my corruption to stabilise my economy and destabilise his, while I slung as many armies as I could field at his settlements. I looted wherever I could to net myself more slaves and money to fund what was going to be a very lengthy war effort. Fortunately for me, all the colonising had left Tyrion with very few massively strong armies, meaning all I had to do was beat the garrisons, and aside from the gates, that wasn't too much of a challenge. Taking my first gate on the island was the first major victory of the invasion, as it meant I had a way into the inner part of the island, which would save me a huge number of turns walking my armies around the long way. It allowed me to mop up the weaker settlements with barely any resistance, since Tyrion was hiding inside one of the gates, waiting for me to come to him. Shortly after this, I got my second major victory when I took out Lorthan and crippled his economy, meaning I'd only need to take out the armies he had right now, and I'd be pretty much set for taking the rest of his settlements without too much competition. During this invasion, I'd managed to get the Sword of Cain from them, as well as the Shrine of Cain, where I let the sword rest, seeing as with Marathe's already heinous public order, I wasn't sure I'd be able to handle it. Even without using it myself, it was worth the effort, since it meant they couldn't use it against me. After a massive number of turns spent cleaning up the rest of Ulthuan, I finally managed to take their final settlement, Phoenix Gate, and after that, it was a case of waiting for the armies to die, whilst they desperately tried to take the nearest settlements to them. During this time, I managed to confederate all but one of the other Dark Elf legendary lords. I got Lokir at turn 49, Helbron at turn 61, and Malus at turn 81, who had spent the next century making his way over to the rest of the faction because I forgot I could swap him out and disband his army to save myself a lot of time. Oops. With the High Elves taken out, I turned my attention to completing my Pokemon card collection of Dark Elf legendary lords by helping Malekith with his wars, which I'd been roped into eons ago. I sent my Black Arcs to the coastal settlements where they could, and sent a land force in where they couldn't. I took a major settlement from a hostile Dark Elf faction. After that, Malekith was more than willing to confederate with me, meaning I could now turn my attention to getting my short victory and finishing the campaign. I noticed I needed to eliminate Tretch, who I had a military alliance with, so I tanked my reliability in the hopes of a quick and easy battle, and surprisingly it was. He had basically no armies, so it was stupidly easy to roll his settlements in a very short amount of time and get one step closer to victory. I then noticed that I needed a very specific building in Grond if I wanted the short victory, but I realised that to get to this building, I'd have to sit around waiting for both the building and settlement to build for a very long time. So given that was a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it, and tick off the only other condition, which was to own 8 faction capitals, the majority of which were nowhere near me and had awful climate preferences. I already had 5 of them, so I chose 3 that were nearby and the easiest candidates to take, and I sent 3 hit squads to take them out on a single turn. After a whole lot of preparation and waiting, I finally pulled the trigger and ticked off the only other condition I needed for the win and called it a day.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You there, are you a part of the 11%? 11% of what? The 11% of people subscribed, of course. If you're not, well, what are you waiting for? The button's right there. Subscribing will ensure you never miss a video, and has been proven to increase your epic gamer skill by at least 1%. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you could also like the video to be in with a chance of winning eternal happiness. So go ahead and subscribe, and join the 11% today. We now return you to your regular scheduled programming.
Now I'll go over the different factions, their starting locations, climate preferences, unique effects, and expansion options. First up we have Nagrond, who start at Nagrond. Choosing them will get you 30 relations with the Cult of Pleasure, and +2 loyalty for new recruits. They have the climate preferences of Frozen, Chaotic Wasteland, and Temperate Island being suitable, Temperate, Savannah, Mountain, and Jungle being unpleasant, and Wasteland, Ocean, Desert, and Magical Forest being uninhabitable. Expanding as them, you stand in a corner, so can expand in any one of 2 directions. Northeast and south, you have a massive number of Dark Elf factions to either invade or confederate, depending on your preference. To the northeast, you have a lot of frozen land and eventually Chaos Wastes, if you are so inclined. To the southeast, you have the High Elves, if you feel like banging your head against the wall, but it is the largest collection of valuable land you can practically invade, so it is a rewarding headbang. The Cult of Pleasure starts at the ancient city of Quintex. Choosing them will give you +20 relations with Dark Elves, and -40 relations with the Exiles of Nehek. You get -50% to hero action cost and upkeep, and -25% to construction cost for sorcery buildings. The main aspect I want to talk about, however, is the Chaos Corruption mechanic. Now let me take you back to the Vampire Coast guide when I said this. A lack of corruption will cause severe public order penalties, and a high level of it will provide you with a bonus, which makes the faction into one of the simultaneously hardest and easiest factions to expand as. Marathe's Chaos Corruption mechanic is like this, but she gets no bonus for high corruption other than getting rid of the lack of corruption penalty and attrition for foreign armies. This makes her incredibly handicapped since her public order is constantly terrible since she gets no bonuses for high corruption, meaning you still need to invest in increasing the corruption just to have the terrible public order since you still need buildings to increase it. Yes, I know the corruption building also increases public order, but that's not the point. In my opinion, they should either remove or rework this mechanic entirely, or make it like the vampire counts where you get a bonus for high corruption. Now that rant is out of the way, let's get back on topic. She has the same climate preferences as Malekith, and to be honest similar expansion options, seeing as she spawns in basically the same place but more south. This means if you really wanted, you could expand south into Lustria, but I don't know why you would ever do that, since it's all unpleasant lands, and of course it is also bloody Lustria. To the north we have all the same Dark Elf factions as before that you can either invade or confederate. East are the High Elves and their highly valuable but highly defended lands. And finally, along the top of the map you have the Frozen Wastes if you really want to annoy chaos. Haganeth starts at Haganeth, and choosing them allows you to consume slaves to trigger a Death Knight, which summons an allied Blood Voyage army, among other things, and failing to hold these Death Knights will result in a penalty. You also get a +2 to Death Hag hero capacity, plus 25% to casualties captured post-battle, and a unique right which I'll come back to later. They have the same climate preferences as the other two, and the same expansion options since they start in basically the same place as Malekith, so I won't bother going over it again. The Blessed Dread start in Chapayotl, I think. Choosing them grants you plus 50% income from slave pens and markets. Every major port you own will increase your black art capacity, and they also get a unique right, which I'll again come back to later. They have slightly different climate preferences than the other guys, with Savannah and Jungle becoming suitable, Chaotic Wasteland becoming unpleasant, and Mountain becoming uninhabitable. Since they start on the east coast of Lustria and don't like desert, there's only really one way to expand, and unfortunately, it's into Lustria. You can expand pretty much in any direction to the west and come across a whole bunch of habitable lands that's likely protected by swarms of legendary lords. To the far northwest are the majority of your Dark Elf buddies, so it might be a good idea to send out some scouts to at least establish contact. Finally, to the direct north, you'll eventually find the High Elves, but I've already gone on about how much fun that can be enough times. Finally, we have Hagrief, who starts with the settlement Hagrief, but Malus Darkblade himself starts by Dragonfang Mount. Choosing them grants you a military alliance with Malekith, and plus 30% income from mines and quarries. Malus is also fighting with the possession of Tsarkan, and the only way he can reduce the effects are by using elixirs bought from Malekith, which will get more and more expensive. High levels of possession grant combat bonuses at the cost of campaign debuffs, and low levels are the opposite. Tsarkan also whispers to Malus to commit cruel acts in exchange for rewards. Finally, Malus can allow full possession for a short time on a large cooldown, which makes him into a monster in battle, but your faction won't be too happy to be led by a demon in the campaign. You also get the choice on turn 1 to either keep Hagrief or sell it for a bunch of money and try your luck in the southeast. Both choices have their pros and cons, so it's really down to what you want to do and where you want to expand. Their climate preferences are again slightly different from the standard, with mountain and jungle becoming suitable. If you choose to sell Hagrief, then the only choice for expansion is in the bottom right of the map, and your two best options are either the lizards to the southwest or the rats to the north. If you head north, you can eventually make your way to the dwarves and greenskins, with plenty of mountainous lands for you to take. If you choose to keep your settlement, you can expand on two fronts, which is a pain in the ass personally, but power to you. If you do this, then you are again right next to Malekith, so the options are the same. Now we come to the commandments, which are the same for the most part, but I'll go over any differences when I come to them. Demand Highborn Hostages grants +4 to Public Order. Enforced Tribute Payments grants +5% tax rate. Sacrifices to Cain grants +1 recruit rank for all units, +5% income from post-battle loot for all armies, and +1 untainted locally at the cost of +100% to the slave decline rate. Marathi has this replaced by Festivals of Hedonism, which grants 2 Winds of Magic Reserve for all armies, and +1 Chaos Corruption locally and in adjacent provinces, at the cost of +100% to the slave decline rate. Read Dark Portents grants +10% ambush chance and -15% enemy hero success chance. Finally, Increased Slave Production Quota grants +10% income from slaves and +20 growth. The research tree is also the same for all the sub-factions, and as research trees go, the rewards are fairly standard, but the layout is quite unique. Each tier is separated into 3 trees, which normally upgrade military, infrastructure and something unique. Upon unlocking the root of each of the 3 trees, you can upgrade to the next tier at the cost of some gold, and this repeats all the way until the end of the tree. The majority of projects offer the usual rewards of unit stat improvements, economy improvements, growth and corruption, and there are of course a few dedicated to the unique mechanics of the Dark Elves like slaves. Speaking of which, I'll now go over the unique mechanics of the Dark Elves and give you some insight as to how each one of them works. First up we have Black Arcs, and oh boy they ever amazing. They work similar to the Vampire Coast shipbuilding mechanic, but they can't go onto land and are normally unlocked through the use of a repeatable right. You can upgrade the ships with buildings that allow recruitment of the entire roster, help nearby armies in battle with abilities, and in campaign with replenishment, recruit rank, and income bonuses. Basically, the more buildings you have the better. The ability to recruit, no matter how deep in enemy territory you are, within reach of a coastline, is crazy useful and undoubtedly saved me heaps of time in the campaign. The 3 abilities you can get in battle can each be upgraded 3 times, and are a welcome addition to any battle, though not essential if you're running out of slots. The final thing to note about them that makes them so strong is that once you have a building, you no longer need to spend growth to upgrade it, meaning you can fill these bad boys up at an alarming rate if you have the cash lying around. Oh, finally, if you fight at sea, they have a custom map which is kinda cool. Slaves next up, and I've touched on this a couple of times, but you really need to know how strong this mechanic can be. Upon winning a battle, you now have the option to enslave captives, which, along with replenishing your army, add some slaves to your faction which are distributed across your settlements. This can also be done by looting or sacking settlements post-battle. You can decide which settlements get how much of captured slaves by selecting one of 3 states, either in the settlement menu or in the slave overview. You can accept slaves, refuse slaves, or request additional slaves. The slave overview menu has a whole host of useful info on it. It shows you all the provinces and their max slaves, current slaves, percentages of how full they are, the decline rate, the income, the public order, as well as the slave income and public order effects. Yes, slaves do negatively impact your public order, but depending on the province, this can be a few negative points of public order for thousands in income, so it's totally worth getting as many as you can. Murderous prowess is the final unique effect they have, and while it may be to do with battle, I'm going to cover it here. Upon reaching a threshold of kills in battle, the effect pops and the combat performance of all your units is improved for a short time. This can help you for wiping out an army even faster, or can allow you to target some chaff to get the effect up to help your army against a particularly tough foe. Since you can't choose when to activate the effect, it can come at inopportune moments, but nevertheless it's a very welcome addition to battles. Finally we come to the rights, which are available for all factions unless stated otherwise. The Sacrifice to Authority costs 100 slaves, has a 20 turn cooldown, and a 5 turn duration. This causes all lords to have a chance to gain 2 loyalty every turn, as well as plus 8 to public order faction wide. It's pretty self-explanatory when you want to be using this one. The Sacrifice to Hecate costs 250 slaves, has a 20 turn cooldown, and a 5 turn duration. It causes all sorcerers to gain 200 XP per turn, and gain 50% more XP from all sorcerers, other than the 200 per turn. It also grants them plus 40% action success chance, and plus 30 wins of magic reserve for all armies. This is a great one to use when you want to rush leveling up some sorceresses, or when you need them to complete an action, or simply when you want more magic in battles. The Sacrifice to Cain costs 375 slaves, has a 40 turn cooldown, and a 15 turn duration. It grants a plus 25% to casualties captured post-battle, plus 20% to casualty replenishment rate, plus 15% to income from slaves, plus 50% income from post-battle loot, and the Dark Conduit ability to all armies, at the cost of plus 50% to slave decline rate for all settlements. This one is of course best used when you are constantly going from battle to battle, since the increases in income and slaves will make your economy skyrocket. The Sacrifice to Mathlan costs 500 slaves, has a 25 turn cooldown, and instantly grants you plus 1 to Black Art capacity. You can use this as many times as you want, and it's pretty obvious when you should use it. The Sacrifice to Drakira is exclusive to Haganeth, and replaces the Sacrifice to Cain. It costs 400 slaves, has a 30 turn cooldown, and a 10 turn duration. It grants plus 2 recruit rank for Death Hags and Witch Elf units, plus 10 leadership and plus 15% weapon strength when fighting High Elves at the cost of minus 25 relations with them. This one should obviously be used when fighting High Elves. Finally, we have the Sacrifice to Anath Rayma, which is exclusive to the Blessed Dread and replaces the Sacrifice to Mathlan. It costs 400 slaves, has a 25 turn cooldown, and a 10 turn duration. It grants plus 20 armor to Charybdis units, plus 100% armor piercing missile damage for Black Art Corsair units, and causes all Corsair units to gain Fear and Stalk. It's always a good one to use when you're doing a lot of fighting with the units that are getting buffed. That concludes this section of the guide on campaign strategy. The next section will cover the unit roster and how I believe each unit is best used, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to vote the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description. If you want to check out the other parts to this or any other guide, there's a link in the card and in the description for a playlist to the series. If you enjoyed this video at any point, please do consider leaving a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.